What if you could turn a plastic dinner mat into Rumi's golden shoulder armor from the song Golden? Well, that's exactly what we're going to do today, and it's going to be easier than you think. Hi, I'm Christina, a digital pattern maker who loves creating wearable art that they can wear and share. And today I'm going to show you how to make Rumi's golden shoulder armor with no fancy cosplay tools required. Here's what it's gonna look like when it's finished. And I actually made mine out of a plastic dinner mat covered in gold glitter and then bound the edges with some fabric so it was lightweight, flexible, and beginner friendly. I did use my Cricut to cut out all the pieces, but you can absolutely cut them out by hand. And if you'd like to make your own or you want to grab my pattern down below, you can find the pattern down below. It does come in 4 different sizes, so you can make sure it is the perfect fit for you. Let's go ahead and gather our materials and get creating. I'm going to be using this remnant of a dinner mat for the upper armor piece on Rumi's shoulder. I'm going to start by spraying some Elmer's spray glue onto the dinner mat and onto the back side of my glitter paper, and I'm going to press them together. I want to make sure that they adhere really well, and I also want to make sure that I let it dry for the time allotted on the bottle. It kind of changes depending on what you're using and what type of glue you're using. So I always recommend look at how long they say you should wait for it before you continue. This is always the hardest part, is sitting and waiting for glue to dry. Once your glue is dry, it's time to cut it out on the Cricut. You can also cut this out by hand. I just have a Cricut and it makes it a little bit easier. I'm going to place my matte and golden paper that are glued together down on my Cricut mat, and then I am going to tape it down. This is just make sure that it's really solid and that it's not going to move or jiggle on me. Then I'm going to move over to my Cricut and I'm going to cut it out. I always add more pressure to the plastic that I use, and I always Cricut it twice. It always helps get it fully cut. So I always recommend cutting twice when you're using this thick of fabric, as well as using the more pressure drop down. Once this Cricuting is done, I will be doing another Cricuting of the glitter paper only. I will be putting a separate piece of glitter paper on the back, and I don't want 2 pieces of plastic in the middle. Then once it's done Cricuting, it's time to pull apart our patterns. I did struggle a little bit. I probably should have Cricuted this a 3rd time. However, once I got it started, it ripped really easily and I didn't have any problems. I did have a little bit of the glue come unstuck. I will be adding a little bit more glue to the top, as well as gluing the second glitter piece onto the back. You will want to ensure that your glitter piece and your plastic piece line up really nicely. This is the edge you will be binding, and it is crucial that they line up nicely. You don't want a little extra paper with no structure of the plastic underneath, as well as you want them to line up nicely so your binding looks beautiful. And then again, once everything is glued, it's time to sit and watch some glue dry for another bit of time. While you are waiting for the glue to dry, you can cut out the bias binding strips if you haven't done that yet. I'm going to go ahead and lay out my golden fabric. I'm going to find the bias using a 45-degree angle on a quilting ruler, and then I'm going to rotary cut some bias strips. Once I have my bias strips cut out, it is time to move to the sewing machine and start binding. I'm going to line up the edge of the bias cut fabric with the edge of the upper cut armor piece, or the lower cut armor piece. I'm going to use the edge of the sewing foot as my guide of how wide I want the binding. And then I'm going to work my way around my armor piece. I'm going to start with working around the 3 sides that have the curves on them. The curves are a little bit tricky, but you can definitely do that. as I am sewing around, I am stretching my bias a little bit. This is going to help keep everything really taut, and I'm not going to get any wrinkles that I don't want. And then once I get to the other corner, I'm going to work my way around that corner and sew up and backstitch. There we are. Then I'm going to trim off the excess bias. I'm going to keep that just in case I need it for something else, but I'm going to set it aside. Ooh, look at how good that's looking. I love it. Once you've trimmed off the excess bias and you've started to flip it to the opposite side, it's time to pin it down. Now, I am folding in the raw edge of the bias so that it lines up with the edge of the armor, and then folding it till it hits just beyond the stitch line I created initially. This will make it so that I can easily stitch in the ditch while not over sewing anything. Now, I also want to mention the pins don't go into the plastic very well, and they don't really want to stay, but I need them there to help hold everything because I can't find my clips right now. So if you're going to do this, I do recommend maybe having some clips instead of pins, because if you're pinning, you kind of have to shove your pin into the plastic and not get a full in and out, and it's a little bit of a pain. So I would recommend possibly having some clips. Once everything's pinned, it's time to move back to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch in the ditch. That is the little crease between the binding fabric and your armor that you have created. And this way, the stitch from the right side will not really be seen, but you are catching that folded area that you just pinned. Now, I definitely recommend going a little bit slow with this and not going too fast or anything, because if you go too fast, you might break a needle. Mostly because I did that once. So I definitely recommend taking it a little bit slower and not breaking needles and having them fly everywhere. There we are. Look at how good that's looking. Woo! Now I want to trim off the excess bias that I have that's hanging over this top edge, because I don't want the thickness when I do the top bias binding. I always leave a little bit extra hanging over because it makes it much easier for me to sew and much easier for it to get started. Then I'm going to do the bias on the top. I'm going to line up the fabric with the edge of the armor, and I'm going to again use my sewing foot as my guide, and I'm going to do a straight stitch all the way across. The straight stitch is so much easier than the curved stitch. Remember, you are also wanting to stretch the bias just a little bit as you are sewing. I'm going to clip off the excess bias again, but make sure that you leave about a 1/2 inch because you are still going to want to sew that down cleanly. You want to make sure you have enough fabric to work with so that you can nicely and cleanly hide the excess fabric. And we're going to move on to folding over our bias and pinning it down along that straight edge. Again, it is much easier to do it on this straight edge. It goes a lot faster, although the pins are still a pain. Again, if you have clips, I recommend them. I do leave that little bit flapping on either end because we will be hand sewing that down next. Once I'm all pinned, I'm going to move back to my sewing machine and I'm going to stitch in the ditch all the way across. Remember, you're going to want to go a little bit slower so that you don't break a needle. Now it's time to deal with those flappity corners. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull them taut fold them onto what I'm going to be using as the back of the armor, and then I'm going to hand stitch them down. I hand stitch it because this is getting very thick in the corner and I don't want to have to try to get it under the machine or have it accidentally break another needle, and I can just quickly whip, 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 stitch all around and have those two little flappity-doos contained. Once you have both armor pieces done, you're going to want to place them and sew them together. Before you do this, you want to curve them like they're going to curve on your body so that they are still nicely sitting next to each other. I popped my shorter one up even just a little bit more so that I had a little bit of space in between the two so that it had a fun, more three-dimensional look. Then I'm going to move to my industrial sewing machine this time, and I'm going to carefully stitch them together. I am going to move slow, but backstitch and forward stitch on both sides of the armor piece. The last thing to do is to decorate it. I found these amazing little rhinestone grommets that I thought would look really great and kind of look like the rivets around the edge of her armor. I did a quick test to see if I would like how it looked and if it would go in easily, and it did. I then took it back out and I did the step that we just talked about of actually sewing them together because I wanted to add all these on after, but I forgot to record it, so I still had this one, but I wanted to show you guys. And now she's done. Look at how good she looks. All you have to do is attach her to your jacket. I chose to attach her via snaps, but you can attach her however it works best for you. I hope you had fun making roomy shoulder armor with me. Don't forget, you can grab the pattern down below. I have it linked in the description. And remember, it comes in 4 different sizes that you can cut out and test with paper size to make sure you're getting the right size you want. And if you want to see more of the pieces from Rumi's K-pop Demon Hunter's golden costume come together, or even learn how to digitally draft your own sewing patterns, make sure to like this video and subscribe so that you don't miss any of those tutorials. I can't wait to see what you create. I look forward to seeing you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!